Welcome to San Diego Therapy Center's Suicide Awareness Workshop. I am Melissa Whitmire, a Master Suicide Prevention and Intervention Trainer. I've spent many years listening to and intervening with those at risk for suicide, as well as working on a research team dedicated to understanding how communities can help those at risk. I'm thankful to be able to share what we've learned. The fact that you've chosen to be here today shows your dedication to something truly impactful, saving lives. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Oceanside Community Foundation for funding this training. It's an important conversation that many people have never had. So let's talk about suicide awareness. We're so glad that you've chosen to join the San Diego Therapy Center and me in our Suicide Awareness Workshop. In our webinar today, we'll be helping you to step into the role as a suicide prevention gatekeeper. To begin intervening with a person at risk, we're first going to talk about understanding and acknowledging our own feelings around suicide so we can support others. Then we'll talk about the impact of suicide in our communities as we look at the data and how we can dispel some of the myths surrounding suicide so that we're more open to help. In our second webinar, we'll talk about the risk factors, warning signs, and initial steps into talking with a person at risk or in crisis to help us understand how we can link them to resources, services, and supports. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself. To give you some context about my career, I've spent 20 years dedicated to suicide prevention and behavioral health. I started my career working for 7 years on a crisis hotline as a counselor, trainer, liaison, and coach, helping individuals in crisis and equipping volunteers and counselors with the tools to do the same. For more than 10 years, I worked on multiple federal suicide prevention grants. These grants focused on training professionals and working within behavioral health systems of care to identify and link people at risk. We were supporting organizations including hospitals, behavioral health systems, educational systems, law enforcement, first responders, veterans, and human service organizations. One of my key roles was to help these systems implement the Zero Suicide Initiative, which ensures that people at risk are connected to care through effective care transition programs. I also served as the Director of Operations at a community behavioral health center where I was responsible for developing prevention programs, policies, procedures, compliance measures, and program development that would improve care for our community. My passion for this work really stems from seeing firsthand the impact that coordinated care and informed intervention can have in preventing suicides and saving lives. Today, I'm proud to serve as a public health strategist for behavioral health in my community. My work focuses on identifying our community's behavioral health needs and gaps, seeking collaboration opportunities, and expanding the services, resources, and supports available to those in need. Throughout my career, whether it was building collaborations between systems, developing prevention programs, or directly supporting individuals, my goal has always been to make a meaningful impact in preventing suicide and improving mental health outcomes. I'm excited to share what I've learned with you today and explore how we can continue making a difference in our communities. As we begin to talk about suicide, the reality is that it has a far-reaching impact. Suicide does not just affect one person. It sends ripples through families, friends, coworkers, and entire communities. Each death leaves a void that can deeply affect the mental, emotional, and even physical well-being of those left behind. Loved ones may struggle with grief, guilt, or confusion, wondering what they could have done differently. Friends and colleagues might feel the weight of an unspoken emotion or unresolved conversation. The waves of a single loss can trigger significant distress. It's a painful reminder that we all have a role in supporting each other and being vigilant about mental health. The ripple effects show why raising awareness and promoting prevention are critical for protecting not just individuals, but the entire community. When multiple suicides occur within a community, the impact is amplified. The emotional impact grows and entire networks of people are affected, sometimes triggering more losses. This is where suicide postvention becomes critical. Postvention provides essential support for those grieving complicated or prolonged feelings of loss. It helps communities heal by connecting people and ensuring that those most affected don't suffer in silence. The work of postvention is vital in stopping the cycle of grief and preventing further suicides. As we think about a personal crisis or a crisis within a community, it can take one person who really listens to help. That person can be you. If that feels overwhelming or you believe you need someone who is trained, you can always reach out to counselors at 988. One of the most important things to take away from today is that you don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes all it takes is that one person who cares, one person who listens, one person who's there to make a difference. While being there for someone can save a life, we also want to emphasize that you don't have to do it alone. The 988 hotline is there not just for those in crisis, but also to help you intervene. Trained professionals are available to guide you, provide support, and help navigate difficult situations. And if anything we've talked about today hits close to home or impacts you directly, please know that 988 is there for you too. It's a resource to help anyone in need, whether you're supporting someone or seeking help for yourself. You are never alone in this. Before we move much further, I want to acknowledge that some of you may have had personal experiences with suicide at some point in your lives. Unfortunately, suicide is common enough that most people know someone, whether it be an acquaintance, coworker, friend, family member, or even yourself, has considered, attempted, or even died by suicide. We often don't talk about suicide in our society, and it's not common knowledge to recognize warning signs and risk factors and know how to help. This training is relatively new and has not been available in communities until recently. You will learn some things today, and you may be tempted to look back on past experiences and doubt yourself. Here's why you shouldn't. We can only be responsible for what we know at the time we know it. Suicide is preventable, but not everyone will be saved every time. Today we'll focus on how we can move a person at risk for suicide in the right direction toward help. As we just discussed, it's important to recognize that we can't hold ourselves accountable for what we didn't know at that time. The key takeaway is that now that we know, we have the opportunity to learn, to understand, and to move forward with that knowledge to support those around us. Part of that journey involves understanding, supporting, and acknowledging not only the feelings of others, but also our own. The next section is about how we can better recognize and validate the emotions that surface, whether it's fear, sadness, anger, or confusion. By truly acknowledging those feelings, both in ourselves and in others, we create a foundation for meaningful conversation and interventions. This is where support begins, not in having the perfect response, but in recognizing and accepting the reality of emotions that people feel when they are struggling. How often do you ask somebody, "How are you doing today?" and get a simple, "I'm fine, I'm okay"? It's almost automatic, a standard answer that doesn't really tell us much. But when we ask, "How are you feeling today?" it changes the conversation. It invites the other person to open up about what's really going on inside. Asking about feelings moves us beyond surface level responses and allows us to see what's truly happening in someone's life. When we focus on feelings, we also become better listeners. We start paying attention to what's being said and what's left unsaid. By asking about feelings, we open the door to deeper, more meaningful communication and conversations that can save lives. As we go through this presentation, I also encourage you to check in with yourself. If at any point this presentation brings up feelings of loss, sadness, or grief, it's important to reach out for support. Remember that 988 is always available to help guide you through those emotions. So now that we're thinking about feelings, let's take a closer look. These feelings wheels are great tools for identifying emotions, one for youth and one for adults. Take a moment and ask yourself, what are my feelings today? Find the words that best describe how you're feeling and write them down. What's happened over the past few days that might have made you feel this way? Pinpointing your feelings is an important skill, and the more specific we can be, the better we can understand ourselves and help others. Working on enhancing your emotional vocabulary, being able to name it exactly, helps you not only connect with your own emotions, but also helps others identify and articulate their feelings. Encourage yourself to grow your feelings vocabulary. When we can name our emotions, we can start to manage them more effectively and support others who may not yet have the words for what they're experiencing. And remember, the next time you ask someone, "How are you feeling today?" instead of, "How are you doing?" you're inviting them to open up in a much deeper way. So let's have a little fun with this next one. Instead of pinpointing a specific word for how you're feeling, I want you to take a look at these cat and dog pictures. On a scale from 1 to 10, where are you right now? Which cat or dog best matches your mood? Maybe you feel like cat number 5, alert but unsure about this training. Or maybe you're dog number 7, happy to be here and learning. Take a moment to choose your animal and see where your emotions are right now. While this is a lighthearted way to check in with ourselves, it actually leads us into a really important conversation about emotional pain, something we don't often talk about. Dr. Edwin Schneidman introduced the term psychache, which refers to deep emotional pain. This isn't physical pain, it's the mental anguish that comes from feelings like guilt, shame, loss, or rejection. It's the kind of pain that can feel so overwhelming and unbearable that a person may begin to see suicide as their only way to escape it. Psychache is deeply personal, and often people don't know how to express it. That's why it's so important to not just ask people about physical pain, but also emotional pain. By asking someone, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much emotional pain are you in? We open up the door for them to talk about what's really going on inside. So I encourage you to reflect. What's your emotional pain today? Are you a 1 and feeling great? Or maybe a 7 or 8 and just feeling completely overwhelmed? This scale helps us better understand where we are emotionally and can be a powerful tool when supporting others too. Sometimes asking a simple question like, "How are you feeling today?" can open the door to a conversation that saves someone's life. Probing deeper, asking somebody how much emotional pain they are, can also help open up a conversation. But what happens after those questions? How do we take that initial conversation and turn it into life-saving action? This is where gatekeepers play a critical role. Gatekeepers are everyday people, teachers, coworkers, friends, and family who are trained to recognize the signs of someone at risk for suicide and connect them to the help they need. You don't have to be a mental health professional to be a gatekeeper. You just need to know how to identify those people who might be struggling and take action. Gatekeeper is someone who steps up when it matters most. You don't need to be a mental health professional or have all the answers. Gatekeepers are ordinary people who have basic knowledge about suicide prevention and the confidence to intervene when they see someone is at risk. So let's break down what makes someone a gatekeeper. You don't need to be an expert, but having some understanding of suicide and its risk factors and warning signs puts you in a stronger position to recognize when someone is struggling. This belief is key. As gatekeepers, we understand that intervention and support can often prevent suicide. We act on that belief. We also understand that it's okay to be uncomfortable when discussing suicide. What's important is acknowledging where you stand and being willing to engage when needed. Gatekeepers have learned some basic intervention strategies. It's not about being perfect, it's about knowing how to start the conversation and connect someone to help. One of the most powerful tools you have is confidence. Trust that you can make a difference by simply showing you care and taking the first steps. Finally, gatekeepers are prepared to help someone in crisis by offering support, listening non judgmentally, and guiding them to professional resources. Being a gatekeeper isn't about having all the answers, it's about showing up, offering support, and guiding someone toward help. Each of these characteristics makes you a life saving difference. The Tojimbo Cliffs, located in Japan, are well known for their breathtaking, rugged beauty. Unfortunately, they're also infamous as a spot where many have died by suicide. The cliffs, towering around 70 feet above the Sea of Japan, have seen numerous tragic deaths, with an estimated 25 suicides every year. The sheer isolation and dramatic drop into the sea have made it a place where those experiencing emotional pain are drawn when they feel like there's no way out. However, efforts have been made to shift the narrative around the cliffs. The sign, "Life is a precious thing that you have from your parents." Try to calmly think about your parents, brothers and sisters, your children. Please do not keep things to yourself. Talk to someone. Pleads with those considering suicide to talk about their loved ones and encourages them to talk to someone rather than keep their pain to themselves. The message is simple, but it serves as a critical reminder. Even in the darkest times, life is precious and help is available. The Tojimbo Cliffs stand as a powerful symbol of both despair and hope, reminding us of the importance of suicide prevention efforts and the need for community support to reach those in crisis. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is recognized worldwide for its stunning architecture and breathtaking views. Unfortunately, it has also become infamous as one of the most common sites for suicide in the world. Since its opening in 1937, thousands of people have jumped from the bridge in an attempt to end their lives. The height, isolation, and immediate access to a fatal fall have made it a magnet for those in crisis. The fall from the bridge is approximately 220 feet, and most people who jump die upon impact. For years, the Golden Gate Bridge was a place where people went when they felt they had no other option. On the bridge now, you'll find a sign posted that says, "Crisis Counseling. There is hope. Make the call." The consequences of jumping from this bridge are fatal and tragic. This sign serves as a lifeline for those who may be thinking about suicide. It sends a clear and urgent message that there is hope, even in the darkest moments, and that help is just a phone call away. This conversation of gatekeepers brings us back to the Tojimbo Cliffs, where so many have gone to end their lives. One man has dedicated himself to preventing these tragedies. Yukio Shige, a retired police officer, has become known as the gatekeeper of Tojimbo. Since his retirement in 2003, he has patrolled the cliffs daily, looking for anyone who appears to be in distress. His mission is simple but powerful: to intervene before it's too late. He is known for saying, "Wait a moment," offering a compassionate pause that can make all the difference. Yukio invites those at risk to talk, giving them a chance to share their burdens rather than take that final step. Through his efforts, he has saved over 750 people, showing that even in the darkest moments, a single person can have light and hope. More than just stopping people at the edge, he and his nonprofit organization offer ongoing support, including temporary housing and connections to mental health resources, ensuring that those in crisis are not left alone after they walk away from the cliffs. Yukio embodies the very essence of a gatekeeper, recognizing when someone is at risk, intervening with care and compassion, and connecting them to the help they need. His work reminds us that small personal interventions can save lives, and that being a gatekeeper is about being present, listening, and offering hope. In September of 2000, Kevin Hines, a 19-year-old, went to the Golden Gate Bridge with the intention of ending his life. After battling mental illness, hallucinations, and overwhelming emotional pain, he jumped. But as soon as he cleared the rail, Kevin experienced immediate regret, wishing he could undo what he had just done. Kevin fell more than 200 feet, hitting the water at around 75 miles per hour. Though the impact shattered several of his vertebrae and caused severe injuries, he miraculously survived. This second chance at life led him on a path of recovery and advocacy. In the years following his survival, Kevin has become a powerful voice for suicide prevention, sharing his story around the world to inspire hope and resilience. Alongside his father, he co-founded a nonprofit, the Kevin and Margaret Hines Foundation, aimed at providing mental health education and advocating for suicide prevention efforts. One of the most significant initiatives has been campaigning for the installation of a suicide prevention barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge. After years of relentless advocacy, the construction of the net began, and it was completed in 2023. This barrier is a testament to their tireless work to ensure that others are given a chance to survive and seek help, just as Kevin did. Kevin's message is clear: there is hope, and suicide is never the answer. His journey shows us that even in the darkest moments, with the right support, we can find a way forward. Kevin is an incredible gatekeeper. Yukio and Kevin have made a dramatic difference in suicide prevention. One person can make a difference, and everyone should try. This powerful statement from President John F. Kennedy reminds us that each of us has the capacity to make a difference in the lives of others. Whether you're reaching out to a friend or family member or a complete stranger, the smallest action, simply asking, "How are you feeling today?" can lead to life-saving conversations. We've seen this in action through the stories of Kevin and Yukio. These two individuals show us that you don't need to have all the answers to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen, willing to care, and willing to act to be the difference. Start by asking, "How are you feeling?" Then listen. Really listen. And be that connection that may help someone take their first steps towards healing. As we begin to think of ourselves as suicide prevention gatekeepers, stigma around suicide remains one of the biggest barriers to seeking help. People avoid talking about it due to fear, shame, or judgment, and this silence often causes those struggling to feel even more isolated. Instead of reaching out, they may retreat further into their pain. This mindset needs to shift from judgment to compassion. We must understand that suicide is not just the result of a single event, but often a combination of complex factors like mental health challenges, trauma, or feelings of hopelessness. When we acknowledge this complexity, we begin to break down the barriers that keep people from asking for help. As gatekeepers, it's crucial that we not only recognize the signs of distress, but also create an environment where those at risk feel safe to open up and talk. Asking someone about suicide doesn't plant the idea in their mind. It shows them that you care, that you're willing to listen, and that you don't have to face your struggle alone. Our words carry immense power. They reflect our beliefs, our attitudes, and how we view the world. When we talk about sensitive topics like suicide, the words we choose can either build connections or create further isolation. The way we speak about suicide has a significant impact on how others perceive it, and more importantly, on how those struggling may feel about opening up. That's why it's so important to choose our words carefully and to create a space where people feel safe, supported, and free from judgment. As we move into the next section, we'll explore how to talk about suicide in a way that encourages openness, breaks down stigma, and invites a healing conversation. As we move forward from today, I'm going to ask you to change the way you talk about suicide, particularly how you speak about a person who has died by suicide. Language matters. It shapes the way we view and understand people and their experiences. So let's avoid terms that reinforce stigma. Words like committed or successful suicide imply judgment or failure, and they can hurt those who are grieving or struggling. Instead, let's use person first language that respects the individual and focuses on their humanity. For example, instead of saying someone committed suicide, say a person died by suicide. What are the things that we think about when we think about committing? Oftentimes we think about committing crimes or sins, and suicide is not a crime or a sin. Instead of saying successful or failed attempt, say a person lived through a suicide attempt. Keep in mind that to somebody who's lost a loved one to suicide, it does not feel successful. And to somebody who may have attempted suicide in the past, to think of themselves as a failure only continues to have a weight held on top of them. This shift in language may seem very small, but it can make a huge difference. By speaking about suicide in a compassionate and respectful way, we create an environment where people feel safe to talk, to ask for help, and to be understood. Imagine for a moment that you've lost a loved one to suicide, and we change the way that we think about and talk about suicide so that it brings openness to the conversation, and you feel like you're supported and heard. Our words matter, and they make all the difference. As you continue through this journey of learning more about suicide awareness, there are many terms that you're going to come across. Understanding these definitions helps us to recognize the different ways that people may communicate their thoughts of suicide or their intent. Let's break down some of the common terms you might hear. So, one of them may be suicidal ideation or thoughts. This is when people are thinking about or considering suicide. Their ideation may range from just thoughts to a fully developed plan to kill themselves. Suicidal intent is when someone actively plans to take their life. While that threat may be verbal or nonverbal, they're expressing imminent risk. A suicide plan actually outlines the method and time someone may be considering ending their life. Suicide communication often is shared on social media to let others know how they are in pain. They may also leave a suicide note. Suicide euphoria is a lesser known term referring to the sense of calm, relief, or even happiness that people may experience when they've made the decision to end their life. This can be particularly dangerous as it may give the impression that the person is actually feeling better. Suicidal gestures and behaviors include actions like self-harm behavior, like cutting or burning, that indicate an intention to die but may not result in death. An attempt refers to any action taken with the intent to end one's life but does not cause their death. Suicide contagion is where exposure to suicide, sometimes through the media or by knowing someone that's died by suicide, can lead to an increase in suicidal behavior amongst others within their community or people that know or hear about them. It emphasizes the importance of responsible reporting and intervention and postvention efforts. A suicide pact is when two or more individuals agree to die by suicide together, often driven by shared emotional or psychological struggles. And survivors of suicide refer to individuals who've lost a loved one to suicide, as well as those who have survived their own suicide attempt. Both groups need support and understanding as they navigate their complex emotions and recovery. Now that we've explored various terms and behaviors associated with suicide, it's important to recognize that talking about suicide can bring up a wide range of emotions and thoughts. Let's take a moment to reflect on the feelings and reactions you have when you think about suicide and why these emotions are so important to acknowledge. What feelings and thoughts come up when you think about suicide? It's okay to feel scared or uncertain. It's okay if you don't know what to say. All of these emotions are normal and valid. Understanding suicide can feel overwhelming, and it's common to feel unsure about how to approach the topic. But even if it feels difficult, it's important to keep going. Keep learning about suicide prevention, intervention, and how to get involved. With every step, you get closer to making a difference. When we talk about suicide, it's important to remember that our own perspectives and approaches are shaped by a variety of factors. These influences impact how comfortable we are with the topic, how we interpret it, and how we engage with people who might be struggling. Let's break down some of these key influences. So, the first is our personal and family history. Our own experience with mental health, suicide, or loss plays a huge role in shaping how we approach these conversations. If you've experienced loss or struggled yourself, it may influence your views, your language, and your comfort level in talking about suicide. Our community values often influence how we think about suicide. Different communities have different norms when it comes to discussing sensitive topics like suicide. Some communities may encourage open conversation, while others may be more reserved. Understanding these values is key to how we approach suicide prevention in different contexts. Religious beliefs can profoundly shape how we think about life, death, and suicide. Some traditions view suicide as a moral or spiritual issue, while others may focus more on compassion and forgiveness. Recognizing these beliefs can help us navigate sensitive conversation. For those in the fields like healthcare, mental health, education, or law enforcement, professional ethics guide how we handle suicide prevention and intervention. These ethics help ensure that we respond in a responsible, non-judgmental, and supportive way. And culture also plays a significant role in shaping our views on mental health and suicide. Different cultural backgrounds may have varying levels of openness, stigma, or understanding around the topic, and this can affect how we engage with others. Next, I want you to think about the reasons that people hesitate to ask for help. When someone's struggling, they often find it difficult to reach out for help, even though it's exactly what they need. The reasons people hesitate can vary, but there are some common themes that we see. Many people feel ashamed, afraid, or unwilling to admit that they need help. They're worried about how others will perceive them. Some are afraid to upset others or to anger people they care about, and others simply don't know how to describe what they're feeling or what they need. There's often uncertainty about what help is available or what to expect when they seek it. And people also struggle with symptoms of depression and the fear of stigma that can make it difficult to take that first step. What we find is that in many cases, people turn to friends who may not be trained in suicide intervention or safety planning. These friends often feel just as unprepared, yet we hope that they know what to say or do. This highlights the importance of increasing awareness and training so people feel equipped to respond effectively when someone they care about reaches out for help. And then, why do people hesitate to intervene? Many people hesitate to get involved when they see that someone's at risk for suicide, and there are several reasons why. Some worry that they might misjudge the severity of the situation or say the wrong thing, which can lead to feelings of inadequacy. Others fear that mentioning suicide might put the idea in someone's head, or they feel it's simply not their responsibility to intervene. We call that the bystander effect. Assuming someone else will step in because we think that others know what to do. These hesitations are common, but with the right training and awareness, we can overcome these fears and we can take meaningful action to help someone in crisis. Suicide prevention starts with a belief, an attitude, that suicide is preventable. This belief fuels everything we do in our work to support individuals who are struggling. When we approach this issue with the mindset that lives can be saved, we empower ourselves to take action. But more than that, suicide prevention is something that anyone can learn. You don't need to be a mental health professional to make a difference. It all begins with understanding the risk factors and warning signs, having the courage to ask the difficult questions, and showing people that they are not alone. You can make an impact. Each one of us has the power to be a lifeline for someone in crisis. With the right attitude, we all can become part of the solution. We talked about the importance of recognizing people's feelings, understanding your own attitudes, and the crucial role that you play in preventing suicide. Now let's take a moment to look at what's happening beyond our individual roles. What's happening in the world and in our country? To fully grasp the magnitude of the issue, it's important to understand the broader trends and statistics around suicide. Data helps us to see the scope of the challenge and where we can focus our efforts. So let's take a look at the numbers and what they tell us about suicide on a global, national, and local scale. In 1999, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. David Satcher, made a profound statement. Suicide is a national public health problem. This declaration marked a pivotal moment in recognizing suicide as not just a personal tragedy, but a crisis impacting the health and well-being of entire communities across the nation. As we explore the data, we'll see how this statement holds true today, more than 2 decades later. Suicide affects individuals from all walks of life. and its far-reaching consequences touch families, friends, and communities. Understanding the scale of this issue helps us frame our efforts for prevention, intervention, and postvention work essential to our public health work. 2022, we saw almost 50,000 deaths by suicide, marking a staggering 36% increase in the last 10 years. This equals one person dying by suicide every 11 minutes, or more than 136 people dying each day. For every death by suicide, it's estimated that there are 25 suicide attempts, bringing the total number of suicide attempts in 2022 to approximately 1.6 million people. When we focus on youth, this number grows even more. There may be between 100 and 200 suicide attempts for every death by suicide. When we look closer at this data, we see a telling disparity. While 3 women attempt suicide for every man, men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. In fact, almost 69% of suicide deaths in 2022 were from white men, highlighting the critical need to focus suicide prevention efforts on this population. Firearms played a devastating role in deaths by suicide, accounting for about 55% of all suicides. Suicide remains one of the leading causes of death in the United States. It's currently ranked 11th. And as troubling as these numbers are, the data for 2023 is expected to surpass them, with early estimates indicating that more than 50,000 people will die by suicide, the highest number in the United States history. This unprecedented rise underscores the urgent need for continued action, outreach, and prevention efforts at all levels. When we look at the 2022 suicide data versus the 2021 data, a few critical trends emerge, particularly in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and older adults. In our BIPOC communities, the suicide rates in Black or African American populations saw an increase of about 4% from 2021 to 2022. In Asian populations, the number of suicides also grew by about 6%. And in the Hispanic or Latino populations, we saw an increase of about 4%. Notably, the multiracial category saw a rise of almost 8%, reflecting a significant increase in suicide deaths. The American Indian or Alaskan Native population was the only demographic to experience a decrease in suicides by 6%. An encouraging sign, but a reminder that targeted efforts in this community are showing results. These rising numbers in BIPOC communities are alarming and highlight the need for tailored interventions, culturally competent care, and expanded access to mental health resources for historically underserved groups. In the 65 and older age group, suicides rose by 8% with 10,433 deaths in 2022. This age group continues to be particularly vulnerable as individuals in older generations may face isolation, chronic illness, or untreated mental health conditions. In the 45 to 64 age group, we saw an increase of almost 7%, showing that midlife remains a high-risk period as well. While the overall number of suicides increased by about 3%, the more substantial increase in the BIPOC communities and our older adults should be a call to action. These trends demand targeted outreach, mental health support, and tailored prevention strategies to meet the unique needs of these populations. What we're seeing here is a concerning long-term trend. Since 2000, about the time that Dr. Satcher said we had a public health concern, suicide rates in the United States have increased by about 36%. While there were brief declines in 2019 and 2020, the overall trajectory continues upward, showing a troubling rise. After the 2012 National Strategy for Suicide Prevention was released, there was hope that it would mark a turning point. Unfortunately, the age-adjusted suicide rates have risen by almost 13% since then, with the rate in 2022 reaching 14.2 people dying by suicide per 100,000, a significant rise from 12.6 per 100,000 in 2012. When we consider the relationship between suicide and substance use, particularly overdoses, it's important to recognize the strong links between these two crises. Research suggests that about 1/3 of drug overdose deaths may be intentional, though it is often difficult to determine whether an overdose was a suicide without a note or other clear indicators. This truly complicates the tracking of suicide-related deaths in the context of overdoses. Opioids in particular have been tied to a significant number of intentional overdoses. The National Institute of Mental Health has noted that as the opioid epidemic has grown, so too has the intersection between opioid use disorder and suicide. Many individuals who die from opioid overdoses suffer from co-occurring mental health disorders like depression or anxiety, further increasing their risk of suicide. Between 2000 and 2022, overdoses have surged and suicide rates have similarly risen. Among older adults, particularly those aged 65 and over, there has been a sharp increase in overdose deaths during the period from 2020 to 2021. This trend is deeply concerning because it underscores how both suicide and substance use disorders must be addressed together, especially in vulnerable populations like older adults who may also experience higher levels of isolation and depression. By recognizing this connection and addressing the root causes, including mental health care access and treatment for substance use disorders, we can work towards reducing both suicides and overdose deaths. In 2022, California had over 4,300 deaths by suicide, making it the second highest in the nation by number, though the state ranked 45th by suicide rate at 11 people per 100,000. This underscores the sheer size of the population and the importance of addressing suicide prevention statewide. Concerning trends show an increasing rate of suicide among men and older adults, reflecting nationwide patterns. In San Diego County specifically, 360 deaths by suicide were recorded in 2022, a slight increase from the previous year. It continues to be important to recognize what our youth are going through and what they think. In the 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it's deeply concerning, particularly when we look at the trends in mental health among our youth over the past 20 years. Nearly 42% of youth reported experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, which translate to almost 1 in 2 of our young people. This prolonged emotional distress can significantly increase the risk of suicide ideation and other harmful behaviors. Additionally, 22% of our youth reported seriously considering suicide, and 18% reported making a plan to kill themselves. Even more alarming is that 10% of our young people have attempted suicide. These numbers suggest that for every 10 young people, at least one has tried to take their own life, illustrating the growing urgency of mental health support and suicide prevention efforts needed in our schools and in our communities. This consistent pattern over the last 2 decades indicates that despite efforts, these issues are persisting and more robust interventions are necessary to reverse the trends. As we move forward, it's important to address the common myths and misconceptions about suicide. These myths often create barriers that prevent us from taking action or offering help when it's needed the most. Understanding the facts behind these myths is essential in breaking down the stigma and equipping us with the right tools to recognize when someone might be at risk. Let's take a look at some of these myths, uncover the truths behind them, and see how we can all become better informed to provide support and save lives. The first myth: suicide typically happens without warning. The fact is that most individuals who attempt or die by suicide give some indication of their intentions beforehand. These signs can be verbal, behavioral, or emotional. They may express feelings of hopelessness, talk about being a burden to others, or mention thoughts of suicide. Others might withdraw from social connections, exhibit extreme mood swings, or give away prized possessions as an indirect way of telling us that they're in distress. Being attentive to these cues allows us to intervene before a crisis can escalate. People feel conflicted about their decision, and reaching out to them at these moments of vulnerability can make a significant difference. By recognizing these signs, we have the opportunity to offer support, connect them to professional help, and possibly save lives. The next myth: people thinking about suicide want to die. The fact is, people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts are usually ambivalent about dying. They often do not want to die, but are seeking a way to end their emotional pain. This internal conflict means that many individuals will reach out for help, either before or immediately after attempting to harm themselves, hoping that someone will intervene. Recognizing this ambivalence is key to suicide prevention, as it allows us to step in with support and possibly change the course of their actions. Many interventions can save lives simply by offering a person in crisis another option. I want you for a moment to remember Kevin and Yukio, reminding people at risk that help and support are available, even when their pain feels overwhelming. Asking people about suicidal intentions will put the idea into their heads and increase the risk of an attempt. This is a myth. The fact is that asking someone directly about their suicidal thoughts or intentions shows that you care, are concerned, and are willing to help. Research has shown that asking these questions does not increase the risk of a person attempting suicide. Instead, it opens the door for life-saving conversations and allows those at risk to share their feelings. These conversations create an opportunity to connect and provide the resources and support they need at the time that they need it. By asking the right questions, we can reduce isolation and offer hope. Next, some people believe that all suicidal people are depressed. While depression is often linked to suicide, not everyone who dies by suicide shows clear signs of depression. Sometimes people might hide their feelings or mask their struggles, and a sudden improvement in mood can even be a warning sign, as it might indicate that they have made a decision to end their life and feel relief. This highlights the importance of paying attention to behavioral changes and risk factors beyond just depression when discussing suicide prevention. In addition to depression, anger is another emotion that can be deeply intertwined with suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Sometimes people may feel intense frustration, resentment, or rage over situations they perceive as unbearable, leading them to consider suicide as a way to escape or take control. Anger can be directed outward towards others in the world, but it can also turn inward, leading us to feel feelings of self-blame, guilt, or unworthiness. Recognizing anger as a potential risk factor is crucial in identifying people who might not exhibit typical signs of depression, but are still at significant risk. The next myth: there's no correlation between drug and alcohol misuse and suicide. We've already touched on the significant correlation between substance misuse and suicide, but it's important to reiterate how alcohol and drugs play a crucial role in many cases of people that attempt or die by suicide. Substance use can lower inhibitions, impaired judgment, and intensify existing feelings of hopelessness. Even for individuals who don't typically misuse substances, they may turn to drugs or alcohol before a suicide attempt, creating a dangerous mix of impaired decision-making and heightened emotional distress. One of our final myths today is that mental health professionals are the only people who can help a person struggling with suicide. The fact is, professional counseling and mental health services are crucial in suicide treatment, but the role of non-professionals is just as essential. Friends, family members, colleagues, and other individuals who regularly interact with the person thinking about suicide can often detect early warning signs and provide initial help and support. Knowing how to respond, listen, and refer someone to the appropriate resources can make a huge difference in preventing a suicide attempt. Everyone has a role to play, not just mental health professionals. And we're so glad you're here to learn about how to be a suicide prevention gatekeeper. As a recap, we've learned talking about suicide doesn't cause it. People who talk about suicide are often asking for help, and most people who attempt suicide show warning signs. What does this mean for you? Recognizing the myths and facts helps us to challenge misinformation and support individuals effectively. This understanding helps us to know when we need to intervene so that we can save lives. So now that we've cleared up some of those myths, let's talk about how you can put this knowledge into action. As we wrap up our webinar today on suicide awareness, I encourage you to have continued learning in the field of suicidology. It's important to remember that awareness is the foundation of suicide prevention. Each of us has a role in fostering a safe environment by using sensitive language and promoting conversations that reduce stigma. By choosing language that emphasizes empathy and understanding, we create a space where those struggling feel safe to speak out. Make it a habit to replace harmful phrases like committed suicide by a person that died by suicide. Always speak with compassion and encourage open conversations, pointing others to trusted resources for further education and support. Remember that you have the power to make a difference. By listening, learning, and becoming a suicide prevention advocate for stigma-free discussions, you can be a vital part of suicide prevention efforts in your community. I'd like to remind you before we leave about President John F. Kennedy's quote, "One person can make a difference and everyone should try." This is true more than ever when it comes to suicide awareness. We thank you for attending the San Diego Therapy Center's training today and want to remind you that you can make a difference. By continuing your education and learning more about the public health approach to suicide prevention in our next webinar, you'll be equipped to recognize risk factors, warning signs, and protected factors, as well as intervention strategies to use in the future. We encourage you to take the next training called Suicide Prevention, which will dive a little bit deeper and help you to help others that may be at risk. Remember that if you've been impacted by this training or someone you know is in need of help, please reach out to 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, or contact the San Diego Therapy Center directly to get connected to a clinician. Thank you so much for joining us in this important conversation. We look forward to talking with you in our suicide prevention webinar, and we hope that you can contribute to saving lives. Thank you so much.